Hello, I'm Matt from The American Edge, and this is a video about kitchen knife maintenance. It is directed towards the people that have utilized my knife sharpening service, and I want to give you some of my own advice on how you can maintain that edge. First things first, let's make sure we are all using a common language. So here's an example blade we're going to use today. Here's the heel, here's the spine, this is the fat end, this is the edge here, and the tip. And I'd like you to take a close look at the edge of your blade, and what you'll see is hopefully a secondary bevel. And so the way that hopefully will make sense is if this is my edge, this part represents the primary grind, the big flat surface, and then the face of my fingers represent the secondary grind or the bevel, and that's the part that I'm sharpening. It would be this surface right up until there, and then it goes in, and then like the majority of the blade that you're looking at is this flat portion here. So hopefully that makes sense. Alright, so we're going to walk through the sequence of using your knife in the kitchen. I'm going to provide you some advice of my personal preference along the way. So let's start at the point of storage, and we'll talk about some ways to store your blades. My preferred way is in a block here, and that is because it keeps that edge from getting banged up. It's nice and easy on the blade. There's really, there's absolutely nothing. That's the way to go. Some other things that you might have in your kitchen would be a magnetic strip, and I don't particularly like those, but I will confess that I use one. And if you use one as well, I would just ask that you please make sure that you set your knife into that magnetic strip spine first, and then fold the primary edge up against the magnet. And then conversely, when you're taking it off, peel your cutting edge off of that magnet and then take the spine off last. And I will tell you that if you're using like a Damascus or a high carbon blade, on that, that tapping against the magnet all the time, you're going to end up chipping your blade. So I'm going to try to steer you away from that, but I recognize that they are convenient and they open up counter space. And I think the next most common way is just throw them into a drawer and they're all piled up on each other. And that's also one that I'm going to try to get you away from. That's just your blades are continuously hitting each other, and they're slamming around when you open and close the drawer, and that's going to be the worst wear that you have on your edge, and that will make it go away the fastest. If you use your knife the way that we're going to talk about, like right cutting boards and stowing it right, that edge is going to last you for a long time. So the number one way to ruin the edge on your knife is to store it incorrectly or non-optimally. All right, so now we're at the point where you're ready to do some cutting. You're pulling a knife out of your block, and you're going to put it onto a cutting board with some veggies or meat or whatever it is you're cutting. Choosing the right knife for the job is important, and that's really your preference. I particularly almost always go to my 8-inch chef's knife. I recognize a lot of people love a Santoku blade. I'm one of them as well. And there's also a time and a place for a nice paring knife. But that's up to you. Like a lot of good options there. The thing I really want to talk about is cutting boards. My preferred cutting board is going to be the end grain cutting board. And I'll give you a close-up of this. You have likely heard about these before, but essentially what it is there are a bunch of pieces where the tree would be growing this way. So if you picture a tree coming up, all the grains in there, like you take off 1 inch or 2 inches of that, glue a bunch of them together, and that's your end grain cutting board. And if you picture the grains of a tree, like that way you're running your knife down into the grains this way, as opposed to a cross grain cutting board, which is the way the majority of lumber is cut. You're running your blade down against those, or perpendicular to those grains. We don't really have our cross grain cutting board anymore. The closest thing I have is this cutting board for an ulu knife. But this would be like a cross grain cutting board. You can see these are like traditional boards. Here, the alternative would be as if the whole cutting board surface was this face. Okay, So I think we've beat that up. If you can get an end grain cutting board, that would be the best thing for your blades. Understand, I also do not cut raw meat on a wooden cutting board, and I respect you if you don't as well. For that case, I do have this plastic cutting board. They clean up pretty nice, and they are not too bad on your knives, but not as good as an end grain. And then lastly, like a ceramic or glass cutting board, I'm going to try to get you away from. You're going to have a tendency to fold that edge over more quickly on one of these cutting boards than on a wooden cutting board. So when it's at all possible, end grain cutting board, cross grain cutting board, wood, plastic, and then last resort, ceramic or glass. Okay, so now you're done with your cooking and your cleaning up. I'll start with the best way to take care of your knives is to wash them by hand in the sink with whatever you're using, a little sponge or rag or something with some soap. Wash it up by hand real quick, dry it off immediately, and then stow it in your holder. If you are like me, you probably try to hand wash as little as possible, so you just throw them in the dishwasher. That will usually be okay, but again, I'm going to try to encourage you to hand wash your knives. Now, once you get into your higher carbon blades, or any blade with a wooden handle, I would say that there is no option other than hand washing. You will definitely degrade your blade by putting that in the dishwasher. And also, if you're using one of those knives, after you wash it, immediately put some knife oil on them. And not just knife oil, that might be misleading. Anyway, I'll include a link to this stuff. But any oil that's designed for coating a knife would be appropriate, and that's really for your higher carbon steel blades to make sure they don't rust up on you. Okay, so that concludes like the day-to-day routine. I think we've talked about storage, we've talked about cutting boards, we've talked about cleaning. There's not a whole lot more to it, but over time your knife is going to get dull. There's nothing you can do about that. So let's talk about some maintenance that you can do at home. And first I want to start with a little explanation. Most of the kitchen knives that I do, I take to a 600 grit stone, and we can talk about that more. Either look on my website or perhaps another video down the road will describe it. But what we're doing there is I'm leaving what's called micro serrations on your blade, as opposed to making it one totally smooth, polished edge, which I would do for more of a pocket knife application. So if we can think about the blade edge like this, like here, this would be the situation where it's real good. Over time, these little micro serrations are going to start falling out. And what you need to do, and what you can do at home, is just run your blade down a hone real light, and it gets those babies to line right back up. Or come off altogether. Like, whoop, bye-bye. So that will work for a long time, but over time, those are all going to start peeling off and breaking away too, and you're going to be left with the equivalent of a blunt edge. And that's the time to bring it back to your sharpener and have them remove a little material so that it brings that edge right back. So hopefully that is a decent enough explanation of what's going on at really the micro level on your edge. And now we'll talk about what you can do at home to take care of that. If you've bought one of these before, it probably came with this device. This is called a hone. And I think there's a lot of misconception that this will sharpen your blade, and that's not really true. What it will do is realign or remove those little serrations that have fallen out of the way. This will work for you, but it's not the best. The best would be to get a ceramic equivalent of that, and that is a finer grit, and it's going to be better for your blade over time. I would recommend that you get one of these, but I'm also going to tell you that while I have one of these, sometimes I still use one of these. So you do what's best for you. But let's talk quickly about how we use it, or how I use it. Again, like, this is just me. I'm going to set this down on my countertop or cutting board, and real lightly bring the edge of my knife against this. Like this, I'm not forcing this in it at all. I'm just bringing it down. I hope little nick right there, which just aligned it. And you'll be able to, if you do this, what you can do, like if you look real close at the edge of your knife, you'll be able to see little shiny spots coming. And if you run your finger over it, like, be smart here, don't cut your finger, but you'll be able to feel little spots where those, what I'm calling micro serrations, are coming out of line. I feel one right there. Same thing coming down this side. Like, you want to avoid pressing down on your blade and doing this. Although I'll be honest, a lot of knives that I get brought to me to sharpen, you can just push your finger down and run along it. Don't do it when I give the knife back to you. So anyway, that's what we're doing. We're either removing or realigning those little serrations. The angle is not totally critical, but it's got, if I'm doing your knife at a 21 degree angle, it's got to be 21 degrees or higher. You're not going to measure that on your hone. If you'll get okay results out to 45 degrees, but you don't need to go that far. So what you can do is, as you get the hang of this, like, see what 45 looks like, bring it in a little bit, and then real light. Like, I'm almost letting gravity do all the work, and I'm not joking. I felt a little nick right there. And that's it. Okay, so hone, ceramic hone, same thing. You'll just get a little nicer result out of it. And I can show you where to get one of those. Okay, so how often do we do that? It depends how much you use your knife. Certainly if you start seeing those shiny spots, or when you're noticing a degradation in cutting performance running across the hone, you'll probably get 15 to 20 chances on the hone to bring that edge back, and then the hone's just not going to cut it, and that's going to be time to bring your knife back to me or your sharpener and get that edge restored professionally. Okay, so the other thing I want to talk about is wiping your knife. I think sometimes this gets people a little scared or confused. And, so this really applies like when you're washing it by hand, or when you have just washed it and you're drying it. The way that I recommend doing this is this is the sharp edge here. Keep that pointed up. Just bring your rag up to it and push down, and with this hand push against it. You can push against it riding up on that edge. But if you start doing this with the edge facing in, then you start getting yourself into a hairy situation. So just rub it in, rub it. Whoop. Done. Okay, so that, I think, wraps it up. So we've covered everything that we can. I think the biggest takeaway for you from this is that the most damage that will occur to your knife is going to occur from banging around the way you store it, whether that's in a drawer, in the kitchen sink before you wash it. If you just leave it in the sink and have plates and stuff piled up on it, that's going to do the most damage to your knife. If you take care of your knives, it's going to last you for a long time. And if you get them sharpened, it'll be totally dreamy. You'll look forward to cooking because that blade is sharp. I've taught you a little bit about how to maintain it in the kitchen. And just recognize that will work for a while, probably every few months, 6 months. You know, it's good to put that knife back on the stone and get that edge restored. And that's it. If you have any questions, you can find me on my website. You can ask a question down in the comments section of this video. And that's it. The American Edge.